The marble floors of the Thornfield Manor gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting a world of privilege that most could only dream of accessing. For 31-year-old Isabella Martinez, the pristine surfaces mostly reflected her own exhausted features as she worked to erase every trace of another extravagant dinner party. Each chime of the antique Westminster clock echoed through the cavernous halls, marking another hour closer to dawn when she could finally return home to her daughter. Then she found herself alone in the children's wing, surrounded by forgotten photographs and consumed by an idea that would shatter the carefully constructed facade of one of America's most powerful families. What she wrote in those photo albums would expose a truth so devastating that it would topple an empire built on lies, corruption, and the systematic destruction of innocence. Thornfield Manor commanded 67 acres of prime real estate in the exclusive hills of Millbrook Heights, its neo-Gothic architecture rising like a monument to American excess. The estate boasted 23 bedrooms, 14 bathrooms, a ballroom that could accommodate 300 guests, and a wine cellar worth more than most people's homes. For Isabella Martinez, it represented both her salvation and her curse, the highest-paying domestic position she'd ever secured, yet a job that consumed her life 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. The morning routine never varied. Isabella arrived each day at 5:30 a.m. through the service entrance, her worn Honda Civic looking pathetically out of place among the Bentleys, Maseratis, and Rolls-Royces in the staff parking area. She would change into her crisp black uniform in the servants' quarters, pin her dark hair into a neat bun, and begin the methodical process of maintaining perfection in a house where appearance mattered more than humanity. Maximilian Thornfield wasn't just wealthy, he was untouchable. As founder and CEO of Thornfield Global Enterprises, he controlled a business empire spanning real estate development, defense contracting, and pharmaceutical investments worth an estimated $42 billion. His influence extended far beyond corporate boardrooms. He had senators on speed dial, judges in his pocket, and enough political leverage to make legislation appear or disappear with a single phone call. The mayor of Millbrook Heights owed his election to Thornfield's campaign contributions, and the police commissioner had been his fraternity brother at Harvard. His wife, Vivienne Thornfield, was America's sweetheart of high society, a former Miss Georgia turned philanthropist whose charity work graced the covers of Town and Country and Vanity Fair. She hosted galas that raised millions for causes ranging from children's literacy to environmental conservation, always photographed in designer gowns beside celebrities and politicians who flocked to her events. Her Instagram account boasted 12 million followers who envied her seemingly perfect life of luxury and purpose. But Isabella saw what the cameras never captured. She witnessed the reality behind the glossy magazine spreads and carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. The Thornfields had 2 children, 9-year-old Anastasia and 7-year-old Sebastian. These should have been the most cherished inhabitants of this palace, but instead they were its most neglected residents. Anastasia was a brilliant child with her father's sharp intellect and her mother's ethereal beauty. She could read at a high school level, spoke 3 languages, and displayed an artistic talent that took Isabella's breath away. The walls of her bedroom were covered with intricate drawings and watercolor paintings that revealed a sophisticated understanding of color and composition far beyond her years. Yet when Isabella arrived each morning, She would often find Anastasia still awake, having spent the night reading by flashlight, because no one had remembered to tuck her in or ensure she was sleeping. Sebastian was equally remarkable, a gentle soul with an engineer's mind who could build elaborate structures from any materials at hand. Isabella had watched him create a working elevator for his stuffed animals using pulleys and string, construct a miniature city from cardboard boxes that included functioning streetlights powered by a battery system he'd devised himself. His room was a wonderland of half-finished inventions and mechanical marvels that would have impressed MIT professors. Both children were homeschooled by a rotation of expensive tutors who reported to Vivienne's assistant rather than to the parents themselves. The tutors were carefully vetted, highly credentialed, and completely interchangeable. When one left for better opportunities or became too attached to the children, they were replaced within days by another equally qualified stranger. Isabella's own story was one of quiet desperation masked by fierce determination. She had immigrated to the United States from Guatemala 15 years earlier, following her husband Carlos, who had secured construction work in the booming housing market. They had dreamed of building a better life for their future children, of achieving the American dream through hard work and sacrifice. Those dreams had crumbled 3 years ago when Carlos was killed in a construction accident, a preventable tragedy caused by his employer's decision to skip safety protocols to meet a deadline. The wrongful death lawsuit had been settled quickly and quietly, with Isabella receiving enough money to cover funeral expenses and 3 months of rent. The construction company, protected by expensive lawyers and liability insurance, faced no criminal charges and continued operating as if nothing had happened. Left alone with her 8-year-old daughter Esperanza, Isabella had discovered that her husband's death benefits would cover only a fraction of their expenses. Esperanza had been born with a rare heart condition that required ongoing medical monitoring and would eventually necessitate surgery. The specialized care cost more than Isabella could earn, working multiple minimum wage jobs, and their insurance coverage was a maze of deductibles, co-pays, and exclusions that left them drowning in medical debt. The position at Thornfield Manor had been a miracle, or so it had seemed. The salary was 3 times what Isabella had ever earned, and the job came with health insurance, comprehensive enough to cover Esperanza's medical needs. But the cost was steep. Isabella worked from dawn until late evening, 6 days a week, leaving Esperanza in the care of her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who refused payment but was increasingly frail herself. Isabella was missing her daughter's childhood to witness the abandonment of children who had every material advantage, but none of the love that Esperanza received in abundance during their precious few hours together each day. Life at Thornfield Manor followed a precise choreography of neglect, disguised as privilege. Isabella's duties extended far beyond traditional housekeeping. She was expected to maintain the illusion of domestic perfection while remaining completely invisible to the family and their guests. Each morning she would prepare elaborate breakfast spreads that Maximilian would ignore as he conducted business calls from the dining room. His attention focused on international markets and merger negotiations, rather than on his children eating cereal in the kitchen, with whatever tutor had arrived that day. Vivienne rarely appeared before noon, spending her mornings in her private spa suite, undergoing treatments designed to maintain her camera-ready appearance. Isabella watched Anastasia attempt to show her mother a poem she had written, only to be dismissed with an absent. "That's lovely, darling," while Vivienne scrolled through social media comments on her latest charity event photos. She witnessed Sebastian's excitement when he completed a complex puzzle meant for teenagers, his eager face falling when his father walked past, without acknowledging the achievement, too absorbed in a phone conversation about quarterly earnings to notice his son's brilliance. The children's schedules were managed by Vivienne's personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Walsh, who treated Anastasia and Sebastian like particularly challenging logistical problems rather than human beings. Piano lessons, language tutoring, horseback riding, and tennis instruction filled their days, but these activities were carefully chosen for their social prestige, rather than the children's interests or aptitudes. Isabella discovered that Anastasia was afraid of horses, but had never been allowed to express this fear, because equestrian skills were essential for a young lady of her station. Sebastian endured piano lessons despite having no musical inclination whatsoever, his natural engineering talents dismissed as not appropriate for someone of his social standing. The tutors were instructed to focus on subjects that would ensure admission to the most prestigious preparatory schools, regardless of what sparked the children's curiosity or passion. Evenings were the most heartbreaking time. Isabella would often find both children in the vast library, sitting together reading or quietly playing games they had invented to entertain themselves. They had learned not to expect their parents for dinner, bedtime stories, or help with problems both academic and emotional. They had developed a touching independence born of necessity, caring for each other with a maturity that should have been unnecessary. The Thornfield social calendar was relentless. 3 or 4 nights each week, the manor would transform into a venue for elaborate dinner parties, charity fundraisers, or business entertainment events. Isabella would spend hours preparing the house for these gatherings, polishing silver, arranging flowers, and ensuring every detail met Vivienne's exacting standards. During these events, Anastasia and Sebastian were expected to make brief appearances, carefully dressed, impeccably behaved, and available for the occasional photo opportunity that would support Vivienne's image as a devoted mother. They would be trotted out like show ponies, expected to charm the guests with their intelligence and refinement before being whisked back to their wing of the house by whatever nanny was currently employed. Isabella observed how the children's faces would light up during these moments of parental attention, only to dim when they realized the interaction was purely performative. She watched Maximilian pose for photos with his arm around Sebastian, his smile broad and paternal for the cameras, only to immediately turn away and resume his business conversations the moment the photographer lowered his lens. The disconnect between public image and private reality was staggering. Vivienne's social media accounts were filled with carefully curated posts about family time and making memories, featuring professional photographs of staged moments that bore no resemblance to the children's actual experiences. The photos showed elaborate birthday parties with guest lists that read like a who's who of high society, but Isabella knew that Anastasia and Sebastian often spent their actual birthdays with only the staff for company, their parents attending someone else's social event or traveling for business. The idea came to Isabella on a particularly lonely Thursday evening in October. The Thornfields were attending a political fundraiser in Washington, D.C., leaving the children with yet another temporary nanny, a stern woman who clearly viewed her charges as inconveniences to be managed rather than children to be nurtured. Isabella had finished her evening duties and was collecting dishes from the children's dinner when she overheard Anastasia talking to Sebastian in the library. The 9-year-old was trying to explain to her younger brother why their parents couldn't attend her school's art exhibition the following week. Mama has that important charity thing, Anastasia said, her voice carefully controlled in the way children learn when they're afraid of showing too much emotion. And Papa's flying to Germany for business, but it's okay because Mrs. Walsh said she might be able to send someone from her office if they're not too busy. Sebastian, in the guileless way of 7-year-olds, asked, "But don't they want to see your paintings? They're really, really good." Isabella watched through the doorway as Anastasia's carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. "I think they're too busy being important to worry about kid stuff," she whispered. That night Isabella couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the casual way these children had accepted their parents' absence from the most significant moments of their young lives. She thought about her own daughter, Esperanza, who would be devastated if Isabella missed even a school play or parent-teacher conference. Despite their financial struggles, Esperanza never doubted that she was the center of her mother's universe. The next morning, while cleaning the children's playroom, Isabella noticed scattered photographs on the low table where Anastasia often did her homework. They were pictures from various school events, family holidays, and social gatherings, images that told the story of two beautiful children growing up in isolation despite being surrounded by luxury. Isabella began sorting through the photographs, and a pattern emerged that broke her heart. In picture after picture, Anastasia and Sebastian appeared with nannies, tutors, and staff members, but their parents were either absent entirely or present, but clearly disengaged. There was Anastasia at her first riding competition, beaming with pride while holding a blue ribbon, with her instructor clapping beside her, and an empty space where supportive parents should have been. There was Sebastian at a science fair, standing next to his elaborate volcano project, his face glowing with excitement, while Maximilian could be seen in the background, checking his phone. The photos from family vacations were the most telling. The Thornfields took elaborate trips to exotic locations, private islands in the Caribbean, safari lodges in Africa, luxury resorts in Europe, but even these supposedly bonding experiences revealed the emotional distance within the family. Professional photographers documented these trips, creating images that would later appear in lifestyle magazines, but the candid shots told a different story. Maximilian and Vivienne appeared in separate frames from their children, or when they were together, their body language suggested tolerance rather than joy. That evening, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She drove to the local photography shop and purchased 2 of the most beautiful photo albums she could afford, leather-bound books with cream-colored pages and elegant ribbon bookmarks. They represented a significant expense on her budget, but she felt compelled to create something worthy of the children who had so little documentation of their true selves. Isabella's project began modestly, working during her lunch breaks and the quiet hours after the children were asleep. She started organizing the photographs chronologically, creating a visual timeline of Anastasia and Sebastian's lives. But this wouldn't be a typical family album filled with smiling faces and happy memories. Instead, Isabella decided to create an honest record, a testament to who these children really were when no one important was watching. Under each photograph, she wrote detailed captions in her careful handwriting. But these weren't the usual family album notations about dates and locations. Instead, Isabella documented what she had observed, the context, the emotions, the truths that the cameras had captured inadvertently. Anastasia's first piano recital, age 6. She practiced for 3 months to prepare this piece. Her instructor said she had natural talent, but her parents were attending a business dinner in New York. The empty seats in the front row were reserved for them. Below this, Isabella had carefully taped the program from the recital, with Mr. and Mrs. Maximilian Thornfield, printed as honored guests who never appeared. Sebastian's 7th birthday party. Vivienne hired a professional event planner who created a superhero theme because it was age-appropriate for boys. Sebastian actually prefers science and building things, but he pretended to love superheroes because he wanted to make Mama happy. 25 children from his tutoring group attended, but Sebastian spent most of the party sitting alone because he doesn't really know any of them well enough to play with them. The project consumed Isabella's free time, but she found it strangely therapeutic. For years she had been a silent witness to these children's lives, unable to intervene or advocate for them in any meaningful way. Creating the albums gave her a sense of purpose beyond her daily duties. She was preserving evidence of who Anastasia and Sebastian truly were, creating a record that might someday help them understand their own worth. As the weeks passed, Isabella's project evolved beyond simple documentation. She began taking her own photographs during her workdays, candid shots captured with the small digital camera she had bought second-hand. These images revealed the children as they truly were. Anastasia curled up in the window seat of the library, completely absorbed in a novel about ancient Greece. Sebastian in the garden, carefully transplanting seedlings he was growing for a botany project, his face serious with concentration. Isabella's captions for these photos were different in tone. Anastasia discovers mythology. She read 3 books about Greek gods in one weekend, and started writing her own stories about modern goddesses. Her imagination is extraordinary, and she should be encouraged to write. Sebastian's secret garden. He's been growing herbs and vegetables behind the greenhouse. He researched companion planting and created an irrigation system from recycled materials. This child has the mind of an engineer and the heart of a conservationist. The albums began to take shape as powerful documents, not just of neglect, but of remarkable resilience. Isabella captured moments of pure joy, the children's faces when they successfully completed challenging puzzles together, their laughter when they invented silly games during rainy afternoons, their concentration when they worked on creative projects that nobody else appreciated or acknowledged. She documented their kindness toward the staff, how Anastasia always remembered to thank the gardener for the flowers he brought to her room, how Sebastian had made birthday cards for every household employee. She recorded their intellectual curiosity, Anastasia's questions about why some people had so much while others had so little, Sebastian's fascination with renewable energy and his earnest plans to fix the environment when he grew up. But Isabella also honestly documented the cost of their isolation. She wrote about finding Anastasia crying in her room after missing her parents' departure for another business trip, about Sebastian's recurring nightmares and his habit of asking if he had been bad when his parents seemed particularly distant. As Isabella worked on the albums, her position in the household gave her access to information that gradually revealed a darker picture than simple parental neglect. Her duties included cleaning Maximilian's home office, organizing Vivienne's personal spaces, and maintaining the private areas of the house where the family's real business was conducted. While dusting Maximilian's desk, Isabella couldn't help but notice documents that suggested his business empire was built on practices that would horrify the public who admired him. There were contracts with defense contractors for weapons systems sold to countries with questionable human rights records. She saw correspondence about pharmaceutical price manipulations that kept life-saving medications out of reach for low-income patients, medications that could have helped children like her own daughter. Vivienne's charity work, Isabella discovered, was equally problematic.
While she raised millions for various causes, the actual distribution of funds revealed a pattern of administrative costs that consumed the majority of donations. The Children's Literacy Program, that had earned Vivienne a humanitarian award last year, had received less than 15% of the money raised in its name. The rest had been absorbed by operational expenses that seemed to largely consist of luxury accommodations and transportation for Vivienne's philanthropic activities. Most disturbing of all, Isabella began to notice patterns in the visitors who came to the house for private meetings. She recognized faces from news reports about political corruption scandals, pharmaceutical executives involved in price-fixing investigations, and real estate developers who had been accused of forcibly displacing low-income communities. These weren't social visits, they were strategy sessions for coordinating activities that existed in legal gray areas at best. The children, Isabella realized, weren't just emotionally neglected, they were being deliberately kept isolated from their parents' activity.
In some future scenario where the Thornfield Empire faced legal scrutiny, these albums could serve as proof that Anastasia and Sebastian had been raised in ignorance of their family's darker activities. She had stayed late to complete Anastasia's album, adding the final photos from the girls' recent school art exhibition, an event that neither parent had attended, despite Anastasia winning first place for her series of paintings about invisible people who keep the world running. Isabella was sitting in the children's study, carefully writing captions under the exhibition photos, when she heard the distinctive sound of Maximilian's Italian leather shoes on the marble floor of the hallway. She quickly closed the album and began straightening books on the nearby shelf, but she wasn't fast enough. "Working rather late tonight, aren't you, Isabella?" Maximilian's voice carried the controlled tone he used when he was displeased, but attempting to maintain civility. "Yes, sir. I wanted to finish organizing some items for the children before tomorrow." Isabella's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. Maximilian stepped into the room, his imposing 6'3" frame filling the doorway. At 52, he maintained the physical presence of the college football player he had once been, combined with the predatory stillness of a man accustomed to intimidating opponents in boardrooms and courtrooms. His steel-gray hair was perfectly styled, his custom-made suit immaculate despite the late hour, and his pale blue eyes held the kind of intelligence that had built empires and destroyed enemies. "And what exactly are you organizing?" He moved closer to the desk where Isabella had been working, his gaze taking in the scattered photographs and the 2 leather albums. Just some family photos that were left out. "I thought Mrs. Thornfield might want them properly stored." Isabella's mouth was dry, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Maximilian picked up Anastasia's completed album, his movements deliberate and controlled. "How thoughtful of you." His tone suggested anything but gratitude. "Let's see what kind of organization you've provided." Isabella watched in growing terror as he opened the album and began reading her captions. She could see his jaw tighten as he processed her carefully, documented observations about his failures as a father. His knuckles went white as he gripped the leather binding, and a muscle in his temple began to pulse. A tell that Vivienne had once mentioned indicated he was approaching dangerous levels of anger. Page after page, he read Isabella's honest assessment of his children's lives. Her documentation of missed recitals, forgotten birthdays and emotional abandonment. Her recordings of Anastasia's tears and Sebastian's confusion about why their parents were never available for the things that mattered to them. When he reached the section with Isabella's own photographs, images of his children, genuinely happy, truly engaged, displaying the remarkable intelligence and creativity he had never bothered to notice, his breathing became audible. "What the hell is this?" The words came out as a whisper, but they carried more menace than if he had shouted. "What gives you the right to judge my family? To document my personal life?" Isabella found courage she didn't know she possessed. "Those children are extraordinary, Mr. Thornfield. They're brilliant and kind and creative, and they deserve to have someone notice." Someone notice. Maximilian's voice was rising now, his careful control beginning to slip. "They have everything. The best education money can buy, tutors from the finest universities, opportunities that other children could never dream of having. They want for nothing. They want for love," Isabella said quietly. "They want for attention from the people who matter most to them. They want to feel like they're worth their parents' time." Maximilian slammed the album shut with such force that several photographs fell to the floor. "How dare you presume to lecture me about my children? You're a maid, a domestic worker who cleans toilets and empties trash cans. What could you possibly understand about the complexities of raising children in my position?" He grabbed Sebastian's album and began flipping through it with increasing agitation. Isabella watched him read her observations about his son's mechanical genius, his environmental consciousness, his sensitivity to others' feelings. She saw something flicker across Maximilian's face that looked almost like recognition, quickly replaced by renewed fury. "These albums," he said, his voice now dangerously quiet, "represent a massive violation of privacy and trust. You've been secretly photographing my children, documenting private family moments, making judgments about matters that are absolutely none of your concern." "I was documenting how special they are," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "I was creating a record of their childhood that shows how remarkable they've become despite." She stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air. Despite what? Maximilian moved closer, using his physical presence to intimidate. "Despite having parents who have given them every advantage. Despite living in luxury that 99% of the world's children will never experience. Despite being raised by strangers," Isabella said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Despite having parents who treat them like accessories to be displayed when convenient and ignored when not. Despite growing up thinking that love is something you have to earn by being perfect and quiet and never needing anything." Maximilian's face had gone completely pale, and Isabella realized she had crossed a line from which there was no return. But she also realized that for the first time in her life, she was saying things that desperately needed to be said. "You're fired," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, effective immediately. "You'll remove yourself from this property within the hour, and if you ever attempt to contact my family again, if you ever come near my children, I will have you arrested for stalking and harassment. I will ensure that you never work in this city again." Isabella looked at the albums in his hands, months of work, evidence of two children's extraordinary potential, proof of their resilience and goodness, despite the emotional desert they were growing up in. "Those albums belong to Anastasia and Sebastian," she said quietly. "They're the only record anyone has ever made of who they really are." Maximilian's response was swift and vicious. He pulled out his phone and speed-dialed a number. "Phillips, it's Maximilian Thornfield. I need you to run a complete background check on someone immediately. Isabella Martinez. She's been working in my household. I want to know everything: immigration status, financial situation, family members, medical records, criminal history if any. I want leverage, and I want it within 24 hours. The implications of this phone call hit Isabella like a physical blow. With his resources and connections, Maximilian could destroy her life with a few strategic moves. He could have her deported, could ensure that Esperanza's medical care was terminated, could make it impossible for her to find work anywhere in the country. "You have 1 hour," he repeated, his eyes holding a promise of destruction that made Isabella's blood run cold. "And if I discover that you've shared any of this information with anyone, if you've kept copies of these photographs or shown them to journalists or social workers, I will make sure that you and your daughter disappear from my city permanently." Standing in the opulent study surrounded by first-edition books and priceless artwork, Isabella realized that she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a custody dispute or family dysfunction. Maximilian's reaction hadn't been that of a guilty parent confronted with evidence of neglect. It had been that of a man with much darker secrets to protect. Because in those photographs, in the background details of her carefully documented observations, Isabella had inadvertently captured something else, something that explained why Maximilian and Vivienne were so careful to keep their children isolated from their real activities, something that would make the parental neglect seem trivial by comparison, something that powerful men killed to keep secret. Isabella drove home through the rain-slicked streets of Millbrook Heights, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. The photo albums were gone, confiscated by Maximilian Thornfield, along with her job and her security. But the images were burned into her memory, not just the pictures of neglected children, but the details in the backgrounds that had caught her attention during those final moments in his study. When she arrived at her modest apartment, Esperanza was asleep, her small form curled under the colorful quilt Isabella's mother had sent from Guatemala. Rodriguez, her elderly neighbor, was dozing in the armchair beside the bed, having stayed late to ensure Esperanza took her evening medication. "How did it go today, Mega?" Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, gathering her things to leave. Isabella couldn't bring herself to explain what had happened. "Fine, Senora. Thank you for watching her." But nothing was fine. As Isabella sat in her kitchen, staring at the medical bills spread across her table, she realized the full scope of her situation. Without the Thornfield job, she couldn't afford Esperanza's treatments. The health insurance would end in 30 days. And her daughter's upcoming cardiac procedure would cost more than Isabella could earn in 5 years. That's when she remembered what she had seen. In those final moments before Maximilian discovered her albums, Isabella had noticed something troubling in the background of several photographs. During the Thornfields' elaborate dinner parties, she had unknowingly captured images of private meetings that weren't supposed to be documented. One photograph showed Anastasia's birthday party, but in the background, partially obscured by party decorations, Maximilian could be seen handing an envelope to Senator Richard Blackstone, the same senator who had been investigating pharmaceutical price manipulation. Another photo, taken during Sebastian's piano recital, showed Vivienne in what appeared to be a heated conversation with Dr. Patricia Hawkins, the FDA official who had mysteriously dropped her investigation into Thornfield's drug patents. The most damning image was from last month's charity gala. While taking a candid shot of the children admiring the ice sculpture, Isabella had accidentally captured Maximilian in the corner of the frame, shaking hands with Viktor Kozlov, a Russian businessman who had been sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department for money laundering. These weren't social interactions, they were evidence of corruption, bravery, and potentially treason. The next morning, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She drove to the offices of the Millbrook Heights Gazette, the local newspaper that had been investigating corruption in city government for years. She asked to speak with Maria Santos, an investigative journalist whose articles about political corruption
Isabella had been following. Maria Santos was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who had built her reputation, exposing the connections between palatial power and criminal enterprises.
When Isabella explained her situation, Maria's interest was immediately piqued. "You're telling me you have photographic evidence of Maximilian Thornfield meeting with sanctioned foreign nationals?" Maria asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "I saw the photos before he took them from me," Isabella replied. "But I remember every detail, and there's more. The way he reacted when he found the albums, he wasn't just angry about the pictures of his children. He was terrified about what else I might have seen." Maria leaned forward. "Isabella, what you're describing could be evidence of federal crimes, but going up against someone with Thornfield's resources is incredibly dangerous. He has the power to destroy your life." "He's already destroying it," Isabella said quietly. "And those children, Anastasia and Sebastian, they deserve better than growing up in the shadow of whatever their father is involved in." Over the next week, Maria Santos began her investigation, while Isabella struggled to find new employment. True to his threat, Maximilian had used his influence to ensure that no domestic agency in the city would hire her. The background check he had ordered revealed every detail of her life, and somehow immigration authorities had begun questioning her legal status, despite her having proper documentation. But Maria's investigation was yielding results. Using Isabella's descriptions of the photographed meetings, she began tracking the connections between Thornfield Global Enterprises and a network of corruption that reached the highest levels of government. The pharmaceutical price manipulations Isabella had noticed were part of a larger scheme to control drug patents and create artificial shortages that drove up prices, enriching Thornfield while preventing life-saving medications from reaching those who needed them. The meetings with foreign nationals were connected to money laundering operations that helped sanctioned oligarchs move assets through American real estate investments, properties developed by Thornfield Global. Most shocking of all, Vivienne's charity organizations were being used as fronts to distribute bribes to politicians and regulators, disguised as donations to causes they supported. When Maria's article was published, it sent shockwaves through Millbrook Heights and beyond. Local billionaires' empire built on corruption and foreign interference was picked up by national news outlets within hours. The FBI announced they were opening an investigation into Thornfield Global Enterprises, and federal agents arrived at the manor with search warrants. Maximilian Thornfield's response was swift and desperate. He held a press conference denying all allegations and claiming he was the victim of a disgruntled employee's vindictive lies. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his political allies began distancing themselves as federal investigators froze his assets. 3 days after the article's publication, Isabella received an unexpected visitor. Vivienne Thornfield stood at her door, looking nothing like the polished socialite from magazine covers. Her face was drawn, her expensive clothes wrinkled, and her eyes held a desperation that Isabella recognized from her own mirror. "I need to talk to you," Vivienne said. "It's about the children." Sitting in Isabella's modest kitchen, Vivienne revealed the full scope of the tragedy she had been hiding. Max didn't just keep the children away from his business meetings for their protection, she said, her voice breaking. He kept them away from everything because he knew this day would come. He's been moving money offshore for months, preparing for when the investigations caught up to him. She pulled out a legal document with shaking hands. He's planning to take Anastasia and Sebastian out of the country tonight. He has a private jet fueled and ready, and he's going to disappear with them to a country that doesn't have extradition treaties with the United States. Isabella felt her blood turn to ice. You can't let him take them. I can't stop him, Vivienne whispered. He controls everything. The money, the security, the legal documents. But you can. The FBI agents investigating the case. They don't know about his escape plan yet. If someone warned them, Isabella didn't hesitate. She called Maria Santos, who immediately contacted her FBI sources. Within an hour, federal agents had surrounded the private airfield where Maximilian's jet was waiting. They found him in the process of boarding with Anastasia and Sebastian, who looked confused and frightened by the sudden urgency of their vacation. The children were placed in temporary protective custody while their parents faced federal charges. Vivienne, who had cooperated with authorities by revealing Maximilian's escape plan, received a reduced sentence in exchange for testifying against her husband's criminal enterprise. 6 months later, Isabella stood in the family court of Millbrook Heights as a judge made an unprecedented decision. Due to the extraordinary circumstances and the children's need for stability during their parents' incarceration, temporary guardianship was awarded to Isabella Martinez, the woman who had seen them, truly seen them, when no one else had. The Thornfield fortune, recovered through federal asset forfeiture, was being used to compensate the victims of Maximilian's crimes, including funding for affordable medications that his schemes had made inaccessible to countless families. Anastasia and Sebastian, now living in Isabella's small but love-filled apartment, were adjusting to a new kind of life. For the first time, they had someone who attended every school event, who helped with homework not because they were paid to do it, but because their achievements mattered. They discovered what it felt like to be truly seen, valued not for their social status or potential usefulness, but simply for who they were. Isabella's own daughter, Esperanza, her medical bills now covered by a victim compensation fund, thrived as the big sister to 2 children who had never experienced the unconditional love of a real family. The small apartment that had once felt cramped with worry now expanded with laughter, homework sessions around the kitchen table, and bedtime stories told in both English and Spanish. On a quiet Sunday evening, as Isabella tucked all 3 children into their beds, Anastasia looked up at her, with eyes that held a new kind of peace. "Isabella," she said softly, "do you think we'll be okay?" "More than okay, mi amor," Isabella replied, smoothing the girl's hair. "You're going to be extraordinary, just like you always were. The only difference is now you'll have someone who sees it." The story of Isabella Martinez reminds us that the most powerful weapon against corruption and neglect isn't money or influence. It's the courage to see truth and speak it, regardless of the cost. Sometimes the most important fights aren't won in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to care for those who have been forgotten by the people who should love them most. The albums that Maximilian destroyed were gone, but the love they represented lived on in the family that Isabella created from the ashes of his empire. In the end, it wasn't wealth or power that won. It was the simple revolutionary act of treating children like they mattered. If this story of courage, love, and justice moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one person's bravery can change everything. Subscribe for more stories that prove ordinary people can overcome extraordinary odds when they choose to fight for what's right.